Good evening and welcome to The Right Side, the show where we talk about today's issues and news events from an admittedly conservative perspective. I'm your host, Chris Pareja, and tonight I'm joined by Tom Vaillencourt. We're going to talk about the exciting topic of taxes.
Everybody's favorite topic.
Exactly. But we've given a couple of weeks of cool down time. April 16th has already come and gone. We've had the ability to pay our taxes or schedule our refunds, swear a lot as required. But it brings the topic up of every year of how do we address this tax issue? And so we're going to talk tonight a little bit about the value-added tax, the flat tax, and the fair tax. And so you seemed like you had a comment ready to go there, Tom.
Oh, yeah, I'm ready. It was interesting that in preparation for tonight, I went into my computer and I looked up on the dictionary for the definition of value-added tax and the definition of a flat tax and then the definition of fair tax. And fair tax did not match any documents. Please try a different word. So I guess even the dictionary thinks there's no such thing as a fair tax.
It's very true. I mean,
Right.
It's always fair to somebody to tax someone else. It's never
Right.
fair to be taxed
Right.
to yourself, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting when they look at. There's a lot of talk these days about taxing the millionaires and billionaires and how do you do it. And they've even had summits at the White House where millionaires and billionaires come in and they are petitioning President Obama, please increase our taxes. One of the funniest things I've seen is that people actually were in the lobby waiting for them with iPads, and because they don't realize that they can actually contribute taxes or donations to the government anytime they want to. So they had the website all queued up and ready for them to do it, and none of those millionaires or billionaires decided they were going to write a check that day. Right. Just something that I find very humorous.
Yeah, it's amusing because liberals or people who believe that you should tax somebody else or income redistribution, which in effect is what taxes are. It's always somebody else's money. Was it Margaret Thatcher said the trouble with liberalism is you always run out of other people's money. And the interesting thing with the tax situation in this country is we've gotten to, from the federal level, a point where way too high a percentage of the population doesn't really pay federal taxes.
Right. The statistics are 47 to 49%, depending on who you're talking to.
In there someplace. Yeah. But the point is that those same people vote, and their vote counts the same as the people who do pay taxes. So you have a situation where how do you get the revenue that the government needs in such a way that is fair to everybody? And that is very difficult. But one of the things from a very radical point of view that would not solve our problem, but it would make everybody in this country very aware of the tax problem, is eliminate withholding tax and go to where people who me and my wife ran a small business for, my wife and I got to say that right, my wife and I ran a small business for 15 years, and every quarter we sat down and we wrote a check to the government on our estimated taxes, and
right.
based on a formula that our accountant came up with. And when you do that, when you write that check, it becomes very, very real. And of course, they'll never do that, but it would drive home just how much of everybody's income, how many hours a day they work to support the government. And if you ask the government to do something, somebody's got to pay for it.
Right.
So that would be a radical way, at least to really bring to people's attention. Now, that'll never happen, but it's nice to talk about.
So are you one of those evil, greedy people who believe that we should pay absolutely no taxes whatsoever?
No, I'm not. I mean, you live in this country, you got to support it, you got to defend it. There are people that, there's things that the government must do because other people, a bunch of neighbors aren't going to get together and build a road.
Right.
They need people to do that. And from a charitable standpoint, this country, any society, will always have a percentage of people who can't handle the day-to-day business of living, who simply can't afford the necessities of life. And the American people are a very compassionate society. and we have to make sure these people are helped. But it has to be done in such a way that makes sense, that there's accountability on the money. The trillions of dollars that we spent on the war on poverty, and I think the percentages from the time it started to the time right today, it's poverty's down 3%. We're doing something wrong. Yeah. But you do need to tax people. I'm not one of these people that don't believe in any taxes.
It's interesting you talk about the war on poverty, and it's interesting that we were on a very steep decline until the early 60s, and then the war on poverty started, and it flatlined, and it didn't drop again. Right. Because it's, again, one of those scenarios where we as Americans and our political system like to treat symptoms, but we're not looking at the root cause. And so we've gotten to a point also where it's a very complex tax structure. I've heard of warring factions within accounting firms. One firm will take one team within the firm will take one position. Another will take the exact opposite. So you've got a conservative tax strategy and a very aggressive tax strategy. And they both can go to court and actually defend their position successfully, because the code is so complex and no one really knows what it is, other than it's taller than either of us, probably standing on each other's shoulders, because special interests and lobbyists continue to buy politicians.
It's much bigger than the founding documents, that's for sure.
Yes, than the Constitution and the Declaration. But what happens is special interests or corporations or unions or others can get together and buy a politician relatively inexpensively and have the tax code written to favor their business and eventually grow to a point where they're too big to fail. But what we were going to talk about this evening is 3 different strategies of how the tax code might be reformed to make it much simpler, much fairer, and so that more people are paying into the tax system to increase revenues or at least flatten them out and give us more predictability. We were talking about the value-added tax, the flat tax, and then the fair tax. Are you prepared to give us a slight description of each?
Yeah, the value-added tax simply means that at every step of production, you add a tax. It's a value-added tax. For example, in my business, and I was in the coffee business, you get the green beans, and then once you roast them, that adds a value to them. And then once you package them, that adds a value to them, and distribute them, and so on and so forth. So that is added at each step. And I'm personally not in favor of the value-added tax because it's hidden. The people don't really realize how much they're paying. And my inherent distrust of politicians says that they will keep raising it. I think taxes should be as transparent as possible. Everybody should know what taxes they're paying. So the value-added tax, I'm not for. Now, the fair tax is getting a lot of play nowadays, and I have had some very conservative people who are very much for it. And if you think about it, it's based on consumption. So what could be fair? If you're a John Kerry and you can afford a $20 million yacht, you can afford to pay taxes on $20 million. And that's fair. If you can afford no boat at all, then you're not paying the taxes. And it protects your investments and your savings. The problem with that tax, there's 2 problems with it. The first problem with is the way the present bill is written, and I believe it's H.R. 25. Yeah, it's H.R. 25.
Within California?
No, this is the federal.
The House Resolution 25.
Yeah. The way it is written, it does not repeal the 16th Amendment. So you're going to give Congress the ability to not only charge a consumption tax, but to charge an income tax. Now, the way it's written is after 7 years, if the 16th Amendment is not repealed, which gives Congress the right to do income tax, then the fair tax goes away. Well, you give Congress 7 years of a consumption tax, it's never going away. Right. Now, that's the one big problem with it. The second big problem with it is they've come up with this very complicated formula of what they call a prebate. Right. Which means that they're saying that if you pay a 23% consumption or sales tax, federal sales tax, on everything you buy, everything. So their theory is we want no exceptions, therefore they can't play games. So they say, okay, but you have to buy food, you have to buy clothes. So in necessities of life, you shouldn't pay tax on. So they have this prebate where a department in the government, Social Security Administration, sends a check every month to every household in the United States. And this becomes part of your living money. This becomes part. In other words, send the money to Washington and they will send back what they think you should have. And this sends so many alarm bells off in my head about freedom.
Right.
You know, we want a smaller government. We don't want government involved in our everyday life. And this is why I'm really against the so-called fair tax, because it's just creates it doesn't make smaller government. It creates can you imagine a government that has to send a check or do a direct deposit to every single household? And then it goes into what is a family, what isn't a family, and it's too big, it's too complicated. So of the three taxes,
well, and then the flat tax.
Yeah, the flat tax. That is the one that appeals to me most. One of the reasons is the flat tax is a total of 17 pages, which means it's simple. The fair tax is 131 pages. Okay, but the way the flat tax is written, there's room for games, and I think we have to really look at it very carefully. But the way the flat tax is written is that basically there are no exemptions. There's nothing. If you earn X amount of dollars, you pay a certain percentage. And the way they get around the necessities of life is the first $30,000 and up, depending on whether your family, they have a formula that this is exempt. So anything above this, which is pretty much the way our system works now, everything above a certain amount, but it's a certain percentage on this amount. Once you go over this amount, it's a certain percentage on this amount. And what that does is it destroys your initiative to earn big money, because the more you earn, the more the government's going to take.
Right.
So, but the flat percentage makes a lot of sense to me.
From a complexity perspective.
From a complexity. If you eliminate all of the deductions, you eliminate all of the loopholes, it's very simple. If you make $100,000, you send 20% of it to the feds, $20,000. That's simple. That's easy to understand. It's easy to work with a certain amount where it's basically tax-free. That makes a lot of sense to me. It eliminates me having to pay an accountant every year to do my taxes. It eliminates a lot of things, and that will help.
Right.
The advantage of the consumption tax is it gets the underground economy, but I think we pay too high of a price for that.
Okay. And so, quick summaries again. So, the value-added tax is a tax on every. It's an added tax on every step in the process of creating a good or
right.
a service.
Oh, goods or service, right.
Fair tax being a consumption tax,
right.
Flat tax being an income tax.
Right, that's correct.
And so on each of these scenarios, they all have pros and they all have cons.
Correct.
2 words on pros for each?
I can see no pro in the value-added tax. I really can't.
You're not a politician.
I know. Well, there's a lot of advantages to the politicians, but to the taxpayer, to the average American citizen, the value-added tax is too hidden, and it can be too easily raised, and there can be automatic raises put in it and everything else. So that, to me, is a disadvantage. Okay, so I see no real good on that.
You see no value in the value-added tax?
No, I see no value in the value-added tax. On the flat tax, the advantage is the simplicity. The advantage is that if Congress is going to raise taxes, they have to do a certain percentage, and they have to do it. They have to go out there, and I believe in there has to be a 2/3 supermajority to raise taxes. But there's no way for any elected official to hide from or make any kind of tax increase automatic. They've got to vote on it, so when it comes time for them to become reelected, they've got to defend their vote for, maybe it was a good reason to raise taxes, but they've got to defend it.
Okay.
So but the flat tax also leaves room for the politicians to play games, but not as many.
Okay.
The fair tax, this huge bureaucracy that's being created, just scares me. And the fact that I would be more inclined to really look a lot harder at the fair tax if two things happen. Number one, the very second the fair tax became law, the 16th Amendment was repealed. And what people who are in favor of the flat tax tells me that that's too high a bar, that it's too high a bar to get the 16th Amendment. And my answer to them is, I wonder what Thomas Jefferson said when he was told we should fight for our rights as Englishmen, that independence is too high a bar. So you can see what I'm getting at. Mm-hmm. If it's really good for the people, it's not too high a bar.
Right. Well, when you're trying to change the Constitution from through its originally designed modification process, it is by design harder to get things done.
And it should be. And I agree, it should be.
As it should be.
And as it should be. So if you're talking about a major restructuring of, again, it's not so much the taxes, but it's the relationship between the citizen and the government. Mm-hmm. Under the fair tax, the citizen now gets, every citizen, every family is going to get what they call a pre-rate. Is going to get money from the government every single month. That money is going to become part of the household budget. That money is going to be part of the planning for how much you can afford for your mortgage, how much you can afford to send your kids to college. Mm-hmm. And the government is going to control what that amount is.
Yes. And based on the number of people in your household.
Based on the number of people, but it's still government control.
And government interaction on a monthly basis.
Right. And what happens if you say something that the government doesn't like? How easy is it for your check to be lost in the mail? How easy it is to have a computer malfunction? And
it creates a whole other level of dependence.
Well,
really.
It is. It's a level of dependence. But it's the citizens willingly giving up control of life decisions to where you're going to tell me how much money you're going to send me, and I'm going to take what you send me, and I'm going to take what I earn after I send 23% or 33% or whatever percentage to you. Mm-hmm. My argument is, if we don't send it there, they can't tell us what we have to do to get it back.
Right.
That's my argument.
They've already gotten the states to do it. Why not just bring it down to the individual level?
No thanks.
Thanks. When we look at this, though, this is another scenario, treating symptoms as opposed to treating the root cause. So number one, there's the tax complexity.
Right.
But additionally, there's a quote-unquote tax revenue problem. Right. And so how do we get more money into the government coffers to pay for all these things that we want as citizens?
There is not a tax revenue problem.
Okay.
The revenue is not the problem. The numbers of dollars going into Washington, D.C. defy description. And the numbers that they're borrowing defy description. But we have to get to a leaner, meaner government. If you run a business, I ran a business. I worked in business all my life. And the expression leaner, meaner means that you sometimes cannot afford the luxuries of this. The other problem with sending too much revenue to Washington is you have the GSA parties, you have the Social Security parties, you have people who just basically don't value the dollar because
it's not theirs.
It's not theirs. So my feeling is that the government has certain obligations under the Constitution that it has to do. It has to have a revenue stream to do that. And you have to be in a situation where you support the government and they have to do things right. But I had a very liberal friend of mine say one time that, I earn pretty good. I don't mind sending money to the government. Everybody should send more. And my answer to him was, if it's to take care of the wounded warriors, if it's to take care of our military, where do I write the check? Where do I send it? These people that are coming back wounded and everything, they should get the best of everything. Where do I send the check?
Right.
but not for Solyndra, not for GSA parties.
Right.
That's the problem, is there's so much money.
What about Cartagenian hookers? Is that okay with you?
No, that's not okay with me. That's you want to hire a hooker, that's your business, but do it on your own dime, not mine.
Well, they weren't even going to pay for that either.
But see, that's the problem.
Right.
Is my idea of a fair tax is everybody has skin in the game.
Right.
No matter what you earn, you have skin in the game. Right. You pay a token amount.
Yeah.
But everybody pays. Now, if you get rid of all these exceptions, and if you get rid of all this ways that politicians, for example, GE, is, he didn't pay any taxes last year. How many times was he in the White House? And you're not going to tell me there's not some political favors going on there because he owned NBC, NBC,
right.
that was not outright rooting for Obama. I mean, that's what we got to stop.
The cronyism.
Cronyism.
Well, thank you for your perspective, Tom, and it's been actually an enjoyable conversation on taxation. So thank you.
You're welcome.
But at this point, we do need to take a quick break and hear a word from our underwriter, the Conservative Forum.
Constitutional law attorney. And they say, oh really, what kind of constitutional law attorney? I say, well, I'm the true kind. The kind that believe that the Constitution is what the Constitution says and what it was intended to say. Anything beyond that is tyranny and should not be allowed.
So let's come to this, my friends. You ready? The second American Revolution against a ruling class that simply lectures but does not listen or defend the American people. It is government versus the people. Am I right? Yes. Look at the Electoral College example. Right? A leftist popular challenge to states' rights. You think the founders weren't brilliant people? Did they not know what they were doing by carefully calibrating to get the small states and the big states to come together? Why does Wyoming get 2 senators in California? Actually, I'd rather have Wyoming's 2 senators.
We'd like to thank the Conservative Forum for giving us an opportunity to unleash our right wing and rhetoric on the airwaves of Mountain View. But more importantly, if you'd like a chance to go to the Conservative Forum and see some of their incredible speakers and learn more about the Constitution, learn more about conservative values across the board, you can join them and often us, at the Conservative Forum at the Portuguese Hall, IFES Hall here in Mountain View at 432 Steerland Road. You can visit the website and sign up for updates at theconservativeforum.com. And just so you know, upcoming speakers for June, for example, is Timothy Sandifer from the Pacific Legal Foundation. In July, it's Tom Tancredo. And in August, it's Jack Cashel. And so please do look them up at theconservativeforum.com to learn more. In closing, tonight we've talked a lot about taxes. And one of the things we hear often is that there's a lack of revenue, which is hurting our ability to provide services to our citizens. But I've actually been tracking some interesting figures, and what I've discovered is that when it comes to actual tax revenue, whether we tax people at a 90% tax rate or at a 33% tax rate, if you look at it over the last 60 years or so, what you will find is that the tax revenue actually generated is about plus or minus 1% of 18% of GDP, gross domestic product. So if you look at that, between 17 to 19% of the actual tax of the GDP is what all you're going to get for tax revenue. And this is a problem because the only way that we can get more tax revenue coming in, yes, we have to cut the spending, but we have to increase the tax revenue through business growth. That's what the economy is all about. That's what free markets are all about. And unfortunately in California, we've created a situation where Carl's Jr. says they don't even want to put new burger stores into California because it takes 6 months to 2 years, where they can do it in 6 weeks in Texas. If we can't if we can't manufacture a hamburger here in this state without a level of complexity and cost, it'll be impossible for us to bring back manufacturing jobs or the green job economy that's being promised to us by so many politicians. So again, we need to stop treating symptoms and actually look at the root causes of our problems. On that note, I'd like to thank you once again for joining us on The Right Side. Again, I'm your host, Chris Pareja, and I look forward to meeting with you in person or on the air again sometime soon. Thanks again for joining us. Have a good night.